Welcome. Better Spaces is a health and happiness solution for today's hybrid workplace. My name is Dr. Paul Kachoa, and I've partnered with them to bring you an easy and educational workday session. So today's session is shoveling secrets, do's and don'ts. We're going to learn the top 3 ways to protect your back and your joints as you clear your driveway or shovel your car out. All right, so let's get into my slides here. I'm going to pull up this other screen. All right, and don't forget, if you have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat or ask me whatever you like as we go through this. So shoveling secrets, do's and don'ts. As a physical therapist, I've been a PT for over 25 years and earned my doctorate from Mercy College in 2010. The stuff that we're going to talk about is general advice aimed at a broad population. So if you're dealing with something specific like an injury or a pain, make sure that you consult a medical professional to have that physical exam done and find out the root cause of your problems. Okay, so without further ado, let's go over some of the do's. So one, we want to start with small chunks to warm up. We want to keep the shovel close, and we want to use our big muscles. So think about shoveling as an athletic event. If we look at it that way, nobody goes into the big football game just cold, just goes out there and just starts picking stuff up. We want to be able to warm up our joints, and we could do that with simple squats and stretches prior, or we could start with smaller chunks and get our body moving through larger ranges of motion. So we raise our core temperature, warm up our joints, and the fluid, the synovial fluid in our joints is less stiff, and then we can move efficiently without aches and pains. And the other thing too is that anytime that you're lifting or carrying anything, the farther that load is away from your center of gravity, your abdominal area, the stress on your body, it's higher. So relatively light loads can seem heavy if we hold them away from our body versus if we're holding something close. So think about the mechanical advantage that you can gain lifting something out far like this or something close like this. And also, we want to use big muscles. Now, if we're going to be out there shoveling in the cold and we're going to be moving and just kind of bending and using our arms a lot, smaller muscles will fatigue quicker than bigger muscles. So we want to use our hips, we want to use our glute muscles, we want to use our core, we want to use our thighs, and then just kind of use the arms as a connection between us and the shovel, but really our lower body does a lot of the lifting, okay? So some things that you don't want to do, we don't want to bend and rotate, forget to hydrate, or overdo it. So bending and rotating is probably one of the most common mechanical ways to strain a muscle in your back. So a lot of times people will go into shoveling, and because it is a off-center type of weight where you're holding the shovel on one side as you're lifting, we don't want to rotate as you kind of lift the shovel and throw it over your shoulder or move it off to the side. So that extension, basically standing up and rotating at the same time, creates a lot of stress on your lower back particularly. Rotation mostly should occur at your hips and your thoracic spine. And most of us are tight in our thoracic spine, our mid-back, and the hips. So the lower back is typically the part that, because it is, it doesn't have any other joints attached to it, like the pelvis or, the hips are attached to your pelvis. It's like a deep socket, so it's pretty a stable joint. And the thoracic spine has the ribs, so that's a pretty stable joint. The midsection through here, the lower back really gets its stability through the abdominal muscles around it. So it's one of those spots that tends to rotate a lot because we're tight in the hips and the mid-back, but it's not designed for rotation. It's really designed for just bending and flexing and then side bending. All right, and hydration. Even in the cold, you're perspiring, you're losing water. The ideal amount of water that you should intake during your day is half of your weight in ounces, okay? And even if you're cold and you don't feel like you're sweating, you still need to hydrate because dehydration occurs before you become thirsty. So your brain takes takes a couple minutes more for your brain to register that you've gotten dehydrated and says, all right, I need to drink water. So we want to drink even if we're not thirsty to maintain our hydration level. The more water we can intake, the more we can flush out bad metabolic waste products that muscle activity produces, and keep our joints, our tissue supple and mobile. The other thing is, don't overdo it. Take breaks as needed. We don't want to go over and just like, all right, I have this job in front of us, and stay focused and do it for an hour when you haven't really done anything in the past 2 weeks or months that have resembled any type of physical activity. So, you know, it's always in the change of the seasons where we see the most injury. Like as spring turns into summer, people start doing more outdoor sports, or in the fall to winter when the seasons change as well. If you're not active other times of the year, don't expect to go out there for 30 minutes to an hour and just shovel and not pay for it. We want to build in chunks, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, take a break, go inside, and then do it again. So you're not doing this whole task all at once, especially if you're not as active as you should be. All right, so the next thing I want to show is a video here of a little bit of the mechanics of shoveling. All right, so let me see if I could pull this up on my next slide. There it is. So we want to think about the bigger muscles doing the motion. So a hip-driven snow shoveling technique. So we want to get low, grab it, and make sure that the shovel, the weight, is closer to your body. Now, if you do any type of exercise in the gym, there's a movement called a deadlift where you're picking the weight up off the floor, or a clean. Well, this is basically the type of movement that we apply to shoveling if we look at shoveling like an athletic event versus just a task or a chore. All right, we're using the core, we're using the hips to explosively stand up and then put throw the snow behind us and into a spot outside of the way. All right, so let's kind of pull back here. So some key things we want to look at here: we want to brace the core, we want to do a thing called a hip hinge, and we want to push through the heel. That's been shown in the video. And we're going to do that through some core exercises, and we're going to talk about what all this is. All right, so I'm going to pull my other picture up here. So I have my little stick here, and we're going to use this as a shovel. So one of the things that we mentioned in the video, and I showed you in the video and talked about, is taking small chunks. So if you're going to take small chunks, and we want to keep that weight close and use our hips at hip hinge. So if I'm here and I'm saying, if I'm cleaning the sidewalk or something, I could start far and start to kind of collect the snow into the shovel. Now, as the snow starts to accumulate in there and it starts to get heavier, then I want to make sure that I'm going to be as close as possible. So if this is the top end of the handle where we have that, and the shovel is all the way at the bottom where the snow is, I want to be able to get down and grab as close as possible to that shovel, to that snow as possible, versus up here. If I'm going to be high and trying to lift, again, that weight is farther away from my center of gravity. That's relatively going to feel heavier for me to lift from here versus using the big muscles of my back, my hips and my legs to get down into this position, into a hip hinge. And then from here, as I stand up, I have a couple options to put this snow somewhere else. So the worst thing to do is to kind of just put the snow, load the shovel up, grab high, and then bend, and then rotate over like this. So we're extending and rotating. So we don't want that. If we're gonna get and do this properly to save the back, we wanna load the shovel, get close, stand up, and use our legs and pivot as we throw that snow off. Or the way that I showed in the video, a hip driven is sort of like, if it's a lot of heavy, wet snow, I grab it so it's parallel to my body here, and I'm gonna grab it with a double overhanded grip, like a barbell, and then I'm gonna explosively stand up and then drive my hip forward and then throw the weight behind me. So I'm using the bigger muscles of my back, my lat muscles, and my glutes to kind of throw that snow over. So I'll load up the shovel again, get it parallel to my body, and then use a glute drive. All right? So this hip hinge that we talked about is basically, if we imagine keeping the back stable, I put the stick here we go, from this angle. The stick is touching my pelvis, touching my mid-back, and touching my back of my head. So this represents my spine, and I want my spine to be as stable as possible. Maybe I'll hold it this way. And from here, what we're going to do is use my hips and knees to get into a position where I can lift and bend something. So oftentimes what I see with clients that come in is that they lose the ability to get into this position, either because of range of motion restrictions or weakness in the glutes. Your body focuses on the path of least resistance and tries to move through a movement pattern to accomplish your task with the least amount of energy. So if you know that, or the body knows that your glutes are weak, you're just going to work around it and do a move where we bend with the knees more. If we bend with the knees more, what happens is that we can't get down, and then we start to round out the back to get into that position. So this is where, if we do this repeatedly over a day, or even with shoveling, if we're doing this for 15 minutes, bending and flexing from the knees and my back, then that's going to create a lot of stress on these muscles in my lower back and my thighs. Versus if I keep my spine straight here and I use my hips and I push my hips back and then I bend my knees, my spine is in a more neutral position. If we're looking from the side here, my spine really stays straight and I'm moving through the hip, and I can do whatever I want with my hands here, and my core is engaged, and there I'm not really bending or flexing from the back. So this type of motion through the lower back is really what lights up that muscle. And the other thing that lights up the muscle is we don't have some core stability. All right. So one exercise that I love to do with a lot of my clients is a thing called a Palloff press. And a Palloff press is taking a band or other cable, column, weight apparatus and getting it about shoulder height or chest height. I'm going to attach it to my treadmill here. And this is a fairly light band. And what I want to do is I want to put this perpendicular to my body. So if I'm facing this way, that band is attached to 90 degrees away from me. And I'm going to hold this right on my chest. I'm going to get my feet set so that they're both pointed in the same direction. We don't want the feet pointed outwards. Think about railroad tracks with our feet. We want to get them totally parallel to each other. It might be an uncomfortable position for you because you're accustomed to having your feet turned out. So we want to get them parallel to each other. That way we can create the most amount of force and torque through the glutes. Okay, so from here we're just going to contract the glutes and contract the abdominals. All right, so pull the belly button into the spine. As we create that tension, we want to feel like we can still breathe. The diaphragm is up here. The abdominals are down here. Specifically, the one that we want to target here is the transverse abdominis that runs across the midsection and inserts into the lower back. It's basically your body's natural back brace. If you've seen people with back braces, they wrap it around like a Velcro. That's basically an artificial external support for your back that you already have. And to activate that transverse abdominis, what we do is we take this band, I'm holding it right at my chest, I engage all that center, the abdominal, the hips, the abdominals, and I just hold this out in front. And what's going to happen is that the band wants to pull me off center. It wants to rotate my body. And what I'm doing is I'm just counteracting that rotation through my hips, my glute muscles, and my abdominals. So another look at this from the side. I'm basically holding this position here, maintaining this rigid position for 20 to 30 seconds, and feeling that tension right into here and my glutes. All right, so my glutes are active, my abdominals are active. I don't want to feel this in my lower back. So if you start to feel this in your lower back, try and reset everything, either lower the weight or lower the resistance so that you can feel that we've got the right muscles working. Again, your body knows movement, it doesn't know muscle unless you really focus on these exercises to activate the right muscle. So looking at it from this angle here, so maybe you get that side view, and then it's just straight out in front. And we can make this very specific to your activity, like shoveling. If I maintain that perpendicular attachment point, I get into the same position, I do this, my arms are 90 degrees away from my body, I could practice doing this hip hinge while maintaining, this is very difficult, maintaining that spine angle. So I don't want to be able to, I don't want this where we're flexing and extending the spine. I want that to be totally straight and still. And I don't want this, I don't want knees. Everyone's out there doing this knee movement every time I say to somebody, show me your squat, they just do this. We want to be able to hinge at the hip, send the hips back so that my weight is even in the middle of my foot. If I just bend the knees, all of a sudden the weight goes to the front part of my foot. That's a no-go. That's going to wear out your knees over time. All right, so that's a power off press. You could look up videos of that online and see the different variations of that. The other one that I always show people is how to activate your glute muscles. A lot of times we sit on these muscles. And just like any piece of meat, if you add pressure and increase temperature to any piece of meat, you will tenderize it. So this is the position that we probably assume throughout the day. We have body weight, pressure, and increased temperature in that area. You know how hot the seat can get when you're sitting there for too long. That's what tenderizes that muscle. And then our body just forgets, or it's inhibited neurologically from accessing that muscle. And it feels like, you don't know how to use it. So we end up using a lot of our quad muscles, which can create more stress on the back and more stress on the knees. So one way to kind of activate these glutes is an exercise called a deer in headlights. Now, it might not look like anything is moving, but we're going to get into a position where you're on your back. You could be on your back, on your bed, or on the floor, basically knees bent, and you're going to put your hands right on your glutes, okay? And then from here, there's not going to be much movement, but what I want you to do is see if you can contract the glutes. Can you flex the muscles? And you should be able to use your hands to feel it. So I'm contracting my muscles. Once you can feel like you can contract your muscles, I feel like everything gets tense under there. Next thing is to try and do it with only the left and not the right, or the right and not the left. So it's just a single glute contraction. So I'm going to contract my left, relax that, and contract my right without contracting my left, and I could go back and forth. So it looks like there's nothing going on. We call it the deer in headlights exercise. You can look this up on YouTube as well, but it's basically just contracting and creating this bigger, more robust brain to muscle connection, being able to control that muscle, one and not the other. And then the next thing that we can do from this position is a bridge. So as we have your feet flat, your knees are bent, you're just going to basically lift your hips up. And we're looking at this movement is purely a hip-driven movement, right? So as I'm going up and down, you can see my hips move. Now, if we hold this position, the question that I ask everybody is, where do you feel this? What muscle is the most active to hold this position? Oftentimes people will say, especially people with chronic back pain, they'll feel in their back. But this is not a back movement. I'm moving my hips, okay? As you can see this, I don't really want to move my back. If we move the hips and your back activates, then that's a faulty dysfunctional movement pattern. That motor pattern is what causes this chronic back pain. We really want to feel this 80 to 90% of tension right here in the glutes. So that deer in headlights is a good prep movement for this exercise. We might feel 10% in the thighs, but I really want the majority, 90% to 80% in here, in the glutes, if we hold this position. All right? So that's a simple glute exercise that can help you protect your back when we're doing this hip hinging with shoveling of snow.